we will move into our main story for today. So, a little bit of context. In 2014, in 2015, my friend of mine was like, Umar, let's watch the top 3 most fucked up movies of 2014. And I was like, sure, why not? And right up at the top of the list was a movie called Predestination. I had no idea what this movie was about. I didn't watch the trailer. All I knew was that it had a ridiculously high rating on Rotten Tomatoes. And I heard that it not only was a mindfuck, but it had up to 12 twists. And me and my friends were like, you know what? We're going to go into this movie and we're going to call all of them. Now, I just lucked out that my cousin Nudgem was visiting. Love you, Nudge. And he was there and he was like, hey, I like fucked up stuff. Let's all watch it together. So all 4 of us got together and watched that movie. And at least each of us at least were able to call one or 2 twists. But that still does not mean that we were able to get all the twists, because like the final 20 minutes of the film, a shit ton of twists came hitting at us and we were not prepared. And nonetheless, I'm telling you all this because I begged Tactix to watch this movie. God, I can't remember what, it would have to be like 2016 or 2017. And
something like that, yeah.
Yeah, and my man was just like, well, what's this movie about? I'm like, just watch it. And I'll let him carry on that story from there.
Well, okay, so yeah, excuse me. I recall you telling me about this movie and how it was on the list of top 10 mindfuck movies. And for me, when I'm watching movies, I like to just turn my brain off. My prefrontal cortex is not active at all, right? So I'm just like, I'm watching mindlessly, like somewhat mindlessly, and just trying to have a good time and not overthink or have to think very hard about what I'm watching. This is why I don't like watching anime with subtitles, right? So I'm watching this movie, and I think you told me, like, don't even watch the trailer, just go in blind and just watch the movie. So I was like, okay, what am I getting myself into? So I'm watching this movie, and at the time I was with Karen at the time. So we were watching it together, and I'm, just, trying to turn my brain off or whatever. And I know it's like that. This ain't that movie. Like, you can't just turn your brain off or be this. I could barely eat because I was like, okay, wait, what's going on right now? And tried to call the twist and could not. Like, I'm not good when it comes to like picking out twists, right? So like, I'm just kind of like focusing on like the movie, trying to enjoy it. And then the first twist happens, and I'm like, what the heck is going on? And then it just keeps unraveling into this spiral of twist upon twist. It's like when around Christmas time, when a person gives you a giant box as their gift, and then you open the box, and then it's another box, and then you open that box, and then it's another box, and then you get to the small box, and you're like, wait, what the hell? So that's how I felt with this movie, watching this, and like all the twists were unraveling. And during that time, I did not understand it at all. I had to read it after the movie was done, and I still didn't get it. Now, I mainly attribute this to the fact that I wasn't very well read. So pretty stupid when it came to movies outside of superhero realm, you know what I mean? And then I started getting more into spirituality and like philosophy. And last weekend, ever since my current girlfriend right now, ever since we started dating, I kept telling her about this movie, like Predestination. We got to watch it, Predestination. And we kept waiting for it to come out on Netflix or on Prime, and it never came out. And so finally, we're sifting through Netflix this weekend or last weekend, and Predestination's on. And she's like, "Oh, look, babe, it's there." So I'm like, "All right, we definitely got to check it out now." And I'd only seen it once before, so I was kind of curious to see how if I could spot all the shit that I missed, and I missed a lot of shit, right? And watching this, I got a much deeper perspective of the movie, given what I know now about like spirituality and about philosophy. And it went from being one of the most confusing and frustrating movies I've ever seen in my life to being probably in one of my top 10 favorite movies of all time.
Oh shit.
Yeah, like I said that shit live on the podcast today, May 14th. Yeah, top 10. Like I love this movie. I love
what?
Yeah, I put it up there, man. Top 10, maybe not top 5, but definitely in my top 10 movies, and mainly because of all the symbolism that it represents, all the undertones that I missed upon the first time I watched it, and it just resonated with me. And like based off of my interpretation of it, I could be way off base, but this is just how the movie made me feel after I watched it. And me and my girl had a long discussion about it afterwards, and it led to some really deep conversations about like life and death and like the meaning of life and like what happens to your like your spirit after you die. Like it got real deep. Just from this movie. Yeah, just from this movie. Like we can go into that a little bit later, but that was my overall opinion of the movie. I ended up liking it for, you know, the twist within a twist within a twist, as well as the storytelling, man. Like the dialogue. It's like there's not a lot of action in the movie, and you know me, I'm an action buff. I love movies that have like high octane like action in it. Like that's why I love the Fast and Furious movies, right? You could turn your brain off and just watch with minimal thought, right? But with this one, you have to pay close attention and listen to the dialogue and listen to what the interaction between the characters, and that's what I really love, because it really pulled me into the story. Maybe because I knew what to expect the second time around, so I was more invested in the story. But as I'm watching this, I'm like, I can't believe how much I missed and like how little I appreciated the movie for what it is and what it's laying out when I watched it the first time. So yeah, I mean, I can go on and on, but I'll let Darcy, I'll throw it to Darcy, considering that he watched it the most recently. So
all right, so just a little bit of context for listeners. I watched it in 2015 and have not watched it since, but I remember it pretty well. Tactix has watched it twice, once around 2016 and one apparently this past weekend. Darcy watched it when I'll actually let Darcy speak. Darcy, when did you watch it recently?
Earlier this week, I forget what day. But here's the funny thing. I don't ever remember watching this film before, but I figured out how half of this movie was going to go in the first couple minutes.
That's bullshit.
Yeah, I knew right away something was up. And there's something in me that's like, that is like when I see like time-based movies, right? Like I pick up on certain clues because I've seen them before. So right at the very beginning of the film, right there in like that boiler room, right? And you see somebody run behind, and
one quick question. We're going to hella spoil Predestination, just an FYI.
So, it came in 2014.
Yeah, no one's watched it by now. They're probably never going to watch it.
No. Like, my point is, if you just found out about this movie and want to watch, we've set you up. Stop listening, go watch the movie, and then come back and rewatch the rest of it.
To be honest, Tactix hasn't said anything really deep about the meat of the story. He's talked about what inspired him.
Oh, I want to get deep though. But this is a movie that needs like deep conversation.
What I mean though is you haven't said anything about the actual storyline. So for someone at this point to be like, "This sounds cool, but what's it about?" I need to lay this. I need to give him something. You know what I'm saying? But so in the very beginning, there's like this boiler room, and there's a person trying to plant this like bomb or whatnot, and then I see somebody like running in the background, and then I heard like somebody come to take the shot at the guy, and I knew it was a second guy. And when he shot him, and there was something about that and the way it opened just made me think like, is this a time-based movie, especially with the name Predestination? And then when he shot him, and he just walked up and like. Or so he got shot, and then the other guy walked up and helped them. I was like, it's himself. It just immediately clicked for me. It's himself. At this point, and I hadn't figured out obviously the other character that is himself and the whole transition. I mean, we're gonna spoil. I hadn't figured out that it was like originally a girl. Like I definitely didn't have that down, but I knew where this movie was ending. That he was seeing himself and helping himself, and it was like that time paradox stuff. I knew that right away. And so from that point, everything was just kind of like, as stuff were playing, I was like, okay. Then I meet the girl, and he's like, well, and I immediately, when I just saw the visual, I'm like, okay, this is a transgendered individual, someone who's transitioned, right? And okay, and then it's like when I used to be a girl, and I was like, okay, there's something here about this. And then I just, as stuff was unfolding, but the theories kept building, I just knew what was coming before it came. For the most of it, I feel like the only thing that was like, and I kind of saw it just before, was like when I realized that the guy in the, like, all the characters in this film is one person, right? I was like, at the very end, I'm like, okay, I wasn't quite seeing all of that. But all that being said, the fact that I was still figuring things out before they got there, I was hella enjoying myself. It was a super engaging story. It wasn't like, oh, this sucks. It was such good dialogue, such good story, that even if I felt like I knew what the answer was, I had to see it through.
You were earning along the way.
Yeah. Look, it was fun to find out that I was right. Instead of, sometimes movies where you're like, oh, I bet it's this, and you get there and you're like, yeah, of course it was. And then it's just like, you're just nothing left. Like it wasn't like, what's his freaking name who made Sixth Sense, where it's like, it's all about the twist, and then his twists suck most of the time. And then you're just like, yeah, okay, cool. Like there's like, if the twist doesn't surprise you, there's no meat left in the story. Whereas this one is like,
you didn't like the Sixth Sense twist?
No, I'm not saying Sixth Sense. I'm talking about all
like his later movies.
Everything after the Sixth Sense.
Okay.
I like The Unbreakable.
Yeah. And my lady really likes Glass, like the most recent one. Which
that movie's trash. I'm sorry.
I said I'm like I enjoyed
parts of
half of it. I enjoyed it up until the last battle, and the last battle was actually cool, and then it was anticlimactic, right?
But that's what we were talking about last week in terms of endings. It's like you have like a movie that starts off really good, and then they don't quite stick the landing, and it just kills the entire movie.
Yeah.
It's like a one night stand that at the last second you're like, oh, I gotta get out of
here. Yeah. So Tactix, I'm interested. What were the things that were resonating with you the second time around?
I like so there's a lot. There was the whole thing that they were talking about in regards to what came first, the chicken or the egg, and then they had that whole the rooster, and then it's like, okay, well then where did the rooster come from? And then it just basically plays on that question of like, what do you believe in? Do you believe in like evolution, or do you believe in God being the creator of the universe, right? Because regardless, like if you go back to like the rooster and then you dissect it into its like initial form, it's like, well, what created that? Like, you know what I mean? Like, and then it got us talking about what was the other thing that we talked about? Chicken or the egg, and then what happens to you once you die, and then predestination, the whole concept of like, that's a biblical reference, meaning that your fate is basically predetermined, right? As like from the moment that you're born, like if you believe in God, then God basically dictates and determines how your life is going to play out. So therefore, there is no such thing as free will. Regardless of what you do, your end result is always going to be the exact same. And it's just like, well, yeah, go on.
It's interesting because, like, in Islamic religion, it's not so much that God has dictated what you will do. It's God is is all knowing. He knows what you're going to do.
Interesting.
He sees all, and he knows all the decisions you're going to make.
Yeah. Which is crazy, because then it's like, well, then do we really have free will? Like, is our life basically mapped out for us? Kind of like with the whole philosophy that they covered in the Matrix, where it's like the question of like, do you believe? What was the question that Morpheus asked? Like, do you believe in free will? Is that what he asked? Or no, fate. He's like, do you believe in fate? And then Neo was like, no, because I don't like the fact that I'm not in control of my own life.
Yeah.
And then he's just like, I know exactly what you mean. So
what you mean.
Yeah, so I like that aspect, and then they touched on the whole thing of like love versus purpose, and then we see that transition in terms of like when Jane starts, she's very unsure of herself. She doesn't quite understand how life works and how like intimacy works, right? Like she's curious about love but doesn't quite understand it. It's very foreign to her, and so she's then choosing purpose. Like
she's a logical individual.
Right. So she chooses purpose, but then she becomes discredited because of her biological makeup. And so she ends up losing out on that purpose and then gets bitter until she finds love when she meets her, spoiler alert, when she meets her male self, and then experiences love for the first time and is all hopeful and everything. And then her male self leaves, and then she gets bitter again and then goes to meet the barkeep, and then she's all like, yeah, fuck love. And then he's like, well, what if I can give you a purpose? So she's introduced to purpose again, and then she goes into that whole process, and it's just a cyclical pattern, because then she eventually will become she'll become the fizzle bomber, or the bartender, and then that'll give her purpose again, or that'll lead to love, because at the end he says, I miss you dearly. So it's like now he's motivated by love, and it's just this concept of like this back and forth between what drives you in life. Is it love, or is it purpose, or can you have both? And it just kind of, I started thinking about that and playing on that aspect of like, can you really have love and purpose, and like what happens if you do have both? And it's like this, it's crazy, man. We started going down this rabbit hole of all this shit, and then he said one line. So when the barkeep meets the fizzle bomber, he starts talking about how it's all one big crazy loop, and he's going off on his tangent or whatever. And then the barkeep threatens to shoot the fizzle bomber, and he's just like, you can't. He's like, you see, you can't kill me, because if you kill me, you become me. So ultimately, you're gonna have to learn to love me. And this had me thinking back to a book that I read called the Buddha's Brain, where they talk about this story of this elder and Native American who's talking to his grandson, and he's telling him the story of the two wolves. So there's the good wolf and then there's the bad wolf. I believe I told you this story a long time ago, Umar. So yeah, basically the story of the two wolves is that there's two wolves that are embedded in us, and they're both fighting for our attention, or fighting for control over our lives, right? So you have the wolf of hate and you have the wolf of love. And so the grandson, he stops and he thinks for a moment, and he's just like, okay, well, which wolf wins? And then the elder native responds, the one that you feed, right? And so the book goes on to say that, so like when you hear that story, you think, oh, okay, so I'll just starve the bad wolf and feed the good wolf, and then I'll have this nice harmonious life, right? But the Buddha's Brain goes on to say that the objective or the objective isn't to kill the bad wolf, because if you kill the bad wolf, you go against what the wolf of love represents. It represents compassion, empathy, right? So it's not about killing the wolf, it's about acknowledging that the wolf exists, and you tame the bad wolf, but you feed the wolf of love. And so when it came to that scene where the barkeep is battling with whether or not he should shoot him, it's like, and then he says that line like, if you kill me, then you become me, right? So you have to learn to love me, kind of like you have to learn to love the bad side of you, or the bad wolf. And he chooses not to do that and ends up killing him anyway. And then he gets thinking that he's like doing it for the sake of love, but then he gets consumed by killing the fizzle bomber, and then ultimately it becomes a vicious cycle where he then becomes the person that he's been set out to kill. So hopefully I didn't confuse anybody listening or watching.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting about the wolf analogy is, I thought you were gonna say, and it still may be semi-true in there, but like if you had two wolves and you only fed one, the other wolf would get so hungry it would kill the other one. And so if you only fed the good wolf and you didn't feel the wolf of hate, right, then the wolf of hate would end up consuming the wolf of love. So
well, I think it's meant to imply that you need to keep the wolf of hate in check, because it's kind of like yin and yang. One cannot exist without the other, right? So there are like the yin yang symbol where it's like black and white, but there's elements of both colors that reside on either side. So it means that there's a little bit of like bad in all of us, right? So I think it's meant to imply that, well, just to kind of give you a personal example, like I used to like literally hate my old self, the person that I used to be in my older relationships, and like, how I was brought up in like my shitty household and all that kind of stuff, right? And there were times back in my past where I used to like think like I wish I never had any of those experiences, because then maybe I would have grown up a little bit different. But then, after reading the book and like, sitting with it and reflecting on it a little bit more, I'm like, okay, well, it's through those negative experiences that I had to endure that shaped me into the person that I am right now. And I'm actually happy with who I became. But I wouldn't have become the person that I am right now if I didn't have those experiences. So I need to acknowledge and appreciate the negative shit that I went through in order to, flourish and come into my own as this new being, if that makes sense. So it's about gratitude for both sides.
I would say that now this was a long time ago, but when we watched it, when we got into a very deep conversation after it as well. And one of the things I asked was because we were identifying the fact that he was himself throughout, like he was the paradox. He and she were both the paradox. So there's a question in psychology where it's like, if you could talk to your younger self, what would you say or do with your younger self? And that it can be any age. You're the one who supplies the age, and you supply how you feel towards that age. But this film kind of did that, as well as what if you met your future self and have them, but you are the one who's being judged by them, but also you're choosing on whether you want to become them. And also your younger self, yourself, and your older self are all just kind of looking at each other and all having to decide whether you want to become or keep what you were or are.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And like, to that question, that psychology question, if you had a chance to go back, like the question is, would you? Because there's a risk that you might alter the future, and it might be good or it might be bad, and you're taking a gamble in doing that, right?
Because we know where we came from. The question is always like, would you go back and like, what would you say to them? What would you do to them? All that sort of stuff. But let me ask both of you: if you actually found a future version of yourself, and it's something that you not only didn't anticipate, you actually don't like, but
a future
version, but they love who they are.
Fuck.
What would you do?
And I had the chance to alter that reality based off like jump in a time machine. You're saying
no. So let's say they came and looked at you.
Oh, okay, right.
And you see what they are.
But unless he told me how I got there, I wouldn't know what to do to change that. I mean, like, because then I guess it plays on that whole notion of like, do you believe in fate, or do you believe that your life is mapped out for you, right? Because it's like, what if like me knowing this knowledge, now I'm like, okay, I'm never going to become like that. But then inadvertently, I end up becoming that because of the fact that I'm trying to avoid all these things that I originally would have done had I not known about that information.
And
does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened in the movie.
Right. So it's like, yeah, I don't know, man.
How about you, Darcy?
I have two answers. Ooh. Or like it's like a fork in the road kind of a thing.
Sorry. I thought you meant like a fork. I'm like, you have four answers?
Yeah, I have a fork. No. So if the version of me is bad in a way, like it loves itself, but has done things that I disagree with, right? Like, then I would alter it, right? Like if it was like I became a killer and and but yet love myself, right? But assuming that that's not like something obvious.
Let's not go to that extreme.
Yeah.
Like I would say that you become something that you yourself didn't foresee happening, and also you don't like. Like let's say in this situation you become a successful businessman, but you like screw over everyone you know, sort of thing. Like, so, like things on that level.
I see. I would, if it was that specific scenario, I would alter it.
Like you mean
Because
you would try to alter it?
yes, because of the basis of that it's not love, it's hubris. But the more likely scenario would be the reverse. I want to be a successful businessman, and then I see a version of myself that ends up settling down with something lesser than my goals and desires, and that version loves itself. In that scenario, I would accept it because it's not based in hubris. It's based in actual like humility, and so then there's something wise in there that I have not yet overcome myself, right? And that's given the nature of who I am right now.
What if it's something that you've never conceived of, but currently don't respect, but it's not actually considered evil?
Interesting. Yeah, I'm trying to think. It's like an extreme example.
This shit got deep, yo. This shit got so deep. Like, wait, Umar, you didn't answer. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump the gun, Darcy. You're still reflecting. I could see the gears turning in your head.
Yeah, I had something. I just was trying to think of how to phrase it. I was trying not to be insensitive in my phrasing.
Bro,
like,
honestly, well,
no, not insensitive to you guys, to a community of people. Like, let's say I was going to change. Like, let's say the scenario was I changed something very dramatic in my lifestyle, right? I'm just going to say that word as a general statement, right? And it's very dramatic shifting, right? Changes people that I love and people that are in my life. That would be a scenario that I would wrestle with very difficult, because it's not something I've seen for myself currently, and a version of me that had seen that and changed. I feel like I would have a very deep conversation. Like, I would be very wanting to know about the journey. I like, as much as just like, it's like because I think the question is kind of asked in the premise of like an off the cuff, you have 2 seconds to make a decision. Like, generally these kind of questions are, but if it's that kind of thing, you have to make a snap judgment decision. Like, yeah, that you'd be very difficult. But if you're given the opportunity to have a conversation, then I think that your answer is very dependent on talking to a version of yourself and seeing what that version of yourself enlightens you with, and seeing if you still agree or disagree with it. So I struggle with the answer on that. If it's something that's, like you said, it's not something that harms anybody, but maybe it harms all the people that I love, but not through direct action, but through something that is only solely for myself.
And it plays up the quote from the movie, "It's never too late to be the person you would have become."
Yeah.
Umar, same question.
So I would say that if I were meeting my younger self, I very much am similar to you, Tactix, where I was not a fan of who I was growing up. And in many ways, who I am now is trying to not become that again. So there would be severe judgment towards the child. Now the child would look at me, and I would actually be interested to see what the child would say about me. Whether they would be disappointed, whether they would be impressed, whether they would be happy. That would be something I would be interested in hearing, but I don't think it would necessarily change me. In terms of meeting my future self and having a conversation with them, I would want to see what they think of me, and I would probably take that personally versus the child judgment of me. But seeing that I become something that I never had conceived of and something I don't currently respect, or something that I don't want to become, but it's not inherently a vicious evil or even a bad thing. It's just a different thing that I just don't want to be. I feel my not being a somewhat of a religious individual in Islam, I would have to believe that this is what I like. This is what I should do, or I say what I should do is to accept what I am and continue to be myself and handle my life the way I am going to handle my life, as if I didn't know that information, and then end up there anyway. Or I think realistically, I would probably try to do but will constantly be thinking of the future version and be second guessing myself internally, but ultimately choose something that I want to do. Anyway, that I think that's my answer.